This is sugar. In 1850, the average person in the world ate 1.8 kilo of sugar per year. In 2017 in the United States, a person consumed 1.8 kilo in about 11 days. This is 3 times the top range of what the World Health Organization advises. So how did this happen? Sugar is in everything you eat, from breakfast to dessert. But just 500 years ago, this cube would be worth its weight in gold. The quest for this innocent sweet was responsible for the transatlantic slave trade. It kick-started modern capitalism and created an obesity pandemic. Humans have always sweetened their food, with grapes, dates or honey. But sugar is special. You can sprinkle it, dissolve it in water to make lemonade, add it to flour. The uses are endless, and you can store it forever. An echo of how special sugar used to be can be found in many festive events, from Eid to Christmas, Hanukkah and Halloween, Easter and Songkran, Moon Festival in China, or just a big wedding cake. Over the last 500 years, sugar changed from a luxury you only brought out during a celebration to a substance you can't escape. So how did sugar become so big? I'm on the internet the whole day for work reasons. But there's a problem with that. Because every time you go online, all your personal data, including your address, your browsing history, the things you bought on Amazon, they are being recorded and sold by companies without your consent. This not only means you can get a ton of unwanted email, but it also opens you up to the risk of identity theft. And that's why I'm happy to talk to you about today's sponsor, Incogni. Just a few weeks ago, my dad was almost scammed. He got a message from someone pretending to be one of his kids. And this person needed money, and money fast. Thank God he asked us first and he didn't fall for it. But these scams are getting harder to spot. Did you know there are actually companies out there using stolen data to clone voices and just go to your loved ones, call them up and be like, hey, this is your son, I need money now, please. This is already happening and it's not as hard as you think. This data is also used by healthcare providers to bump up your premium. Not good. But there's a silver lining to this data mess. Incogni specializes in getting you off the list of these data brokers. By signing up and granting Incogni access to contact these brokers, they can get you off these lists. Sometimes these brokers don't really comply that easily, but Incogni will try their best and fight for you to make it happen. After signing up, you can see in this dashboard how it's going, and I saw they already have 47 requests sent of companies I've never heard of before. So if you like to protect your identity, you can go down to the link below. And the first 100 of you get 60% off Incogni's annual plan. Now you might say, why do I need an annual plan? Well, because if you plan on using the internet, eventually you're gonna end up in these lists again. So if you want to protect your identity, go sign up for Incogni. And I want to thank them for sponsoring today's video. And let's now go back to the history of sugar. For the start of this story, we have to go to New Guinea. Here they domesticated this plant that was special. Sucking it lifted your spirits. It gave you energy. This plant was sugarcane. From New Guinea, this invention spread over trade routes west to India and China. In India, they invented a process to take the juice of this plant and turn it into something solid. The word sugar comes from sakara, gritty particles. Sugarcane then spreads further west into Persia. And when the Arabs take the Persian Empire over, they fall in love with this product. In every place they conquer, they introduce sugarcane. Move on to the Crusaders, and when they arrive in the Holy Land, they in turn get introduced to the sweet stuff. And they are equally impressed. And they talk about this honey reed, how the locals suck in it for the beneficial juices. I know, it's just sugarcane, okay? Never mind. It gives them energy for long sieges, and it was used in medicine. In this period, people died of diarrhea all the time, and drinking sugared water helps to get at least some energy in. For us, sugar is everywhere. But just stop and imagine how it was for people tasting this for the very first time. this blissful substance, the sweetness of the taste, the energy you get from it. I mean, something like coffee is bitter, it's an acquired taste, but straight out of the womb, babies love sugared water. They prefer it over normal water. So sugar now starts to catch on in Europe, but it is ridiculously expensive. In 1226, the King of England begs a trader going to Cairo if he could just provide 3 pounds of sugar, if so much could be got. 3 pounds of sugar? It's like a kilo and then some. If I buy it at the store, it's gonna cost me what? 4 euros? But sugar is about to get a lot less expensive. It's when the Crusaders get kicked out of the Holy Land that Cain starts a journey west. So far west it would travel all the way to Ecuador. And it's also here that the history of sugar starts to split. Sugar was always produced by farmers, just as a nice extra. But now this starts to change. Just for sugar, one invention is made that will completely dominate transatlantic history for hundreds of years. A place away from the markets, in the hands of foreign investors, designated to produce one cash crop, where forced labor is imported to cut the cane, the plantation. This approach, it started in the Mediterranean and it was perfected in the Caribbean. And the Europeans, they are going to need their plantations because the Black Death and a Mongol invasion devastate Egyptian sugar production. So now Europeans have a big need to make their own sugar. Plantations start to appear in Cyprus and Crete. The Spanish and Portuguese introduce sugar plantations in their newly conquered territories in the Atlantic. Columbus takes the cane with him to the New World. The Iberian powers plant sugar as far as Ecuador, using indigenous and imported slave labor to keep the mills running. Now, other European powers see this and they want a piece of this pie. The Dutch, French and English steal some colonies and they make some of their own. But who should be working on these plantations? All these powers experiment with local forced labor and white contract laborers, but not enough of them want to sail around the world for an uncertain adventure. And those that do, they tend to die quickly. So they follow the example set by Spanish and Portuguese and turn their eyes east over the ocean. They tap into existing slave networks in Africa, and soon their extreme demands for ever more people overwhelm these markets, asking for more enslaved Africans than ever before, trafficking a total of 12.5 million people across the ocean to the plantations. There were also plantations for other products, like cotton and tobacco, but of all the enslaved people, half to 2/3 were sent to sugar plantations. And these plantations also have a much higher mortality rate. The thing is, to go from sugarcane to white sugar is extremely labor intensive and dangerous. It's not like potatoes. You just put some potato in the ground and then after some time you pull them up and it's basically ready to cook. With cane, you need a lot of people to manually plant, harvest and cut it. After the harvest, you have an issue with time. From the moment you cut it, you have a maximum of 2 days to get juice out of the cane before it spoils. And you use presses for this that have evolved over the millennia, from pressing it by hand to using rollers to the mortar and pestle mill. But the biggest innovation was the 3-roller mill, powered by animals, wind or water. The sugarcane would be fed between these rollers, from one side and back. It would happen that hands got stuck in the rollers. To save them from being completely crushed, machetes were always close by. The juice would then flow down the rollers and into a container. From there this juice would be cooked until the liquid evaporated. If you've ever made caramel, you know how dangerous it is to boil sugar. If it gets on your hands, it just keeps on boiling. And these furnaces have been compared to the fires of hell. And ever more plantations are built in the Caribbean, more people get trafficked there. And as sugar becomes cheaper and cheaper, it starts to change Europe. Kings in Europe and the Middle East, they used to have these big sugar statues at dinner parties, just to show how wealthy they were. But now, sugar loaves start to appear on paintings of a new middle class. As bigger groups of people have the opportunity to buy this luxury, it gives them the incentive to earn more money, increasing productivity and their income, getting more people interested in investment and innovation. And there are other effects. Sugar makes other new products like coffee and tea easier to drink, so it drives a tsunami of demand for tea. In the UK, tea consumption rose 400 times in the 1700s. So now you understand why the British will do everything to get more of it. Smuggling opium to trade for tea into China, fighting wars to get access to the market, plunging China into a century of humiliation by Western powers, dark memory that still influences Chinese foreign policy to this day. And when industrialization starts to happen, old schedules of living are shifted. People now have to be at work at a certain time. They don't have time to cook anymore. But sugar is there as a cheap and quick road to energy. A cup of sugar tea and some toasts with jam become staples of the working class. So the Industrial Revolution of the UK is partly fueled by cheap calories coming from the colonies. One thing to note is that not everyone is eating the same amounts of it in this time. In the 1700s, the UK is consuming much more sugar per person than France, that also had colonies in the time. Researchers have asked themselves, why? Why did this happen? And there's this quote I found that basically says, is it a bad question to ask whether the English cuisine was so shit they just needed sugar more than the French? I don't know. Now, with so much sugar around, slowly the idea starts to trickle down that this consumption of sweet has a bitter aftertaste. Quakers start protesting the situation of the enslaved. They write this pamphlet, Plea for the Poor. In the pamphlet, they condemn consumption of sugar as it is stained with spots of human blood. And this pamphlet goes completely viral. It goes all over the English-speaking world. It's estimated 250,000 copies of it were made. And nowadays brands get boycotted all the time. But this was the very first consumer boycott in history. The core idea of these actions hasn't really changed. If we purchase the commodity, we participate in the crime, is what they say. And it totally worked. People just couldn't get this cannibalistic idea out of their head that they might be consuming human flesh when dropping some sugar in their tea. So they start something that's also of our time: ethical consumption. They have these sugar pots to signal to their friends they're using slave-free sugar. And of course, as always, there's a counter-movement. Take this milk can, celebrating the slave ship the Brooks. It talks about how they want success for the rope makers. The rope makers? What do the rope makers have to do with slavery? Well, this is something that people not always realize. It is not just a few sugar barons making the profits of sugar. There's a whole industry making ropes, sails, guns, anchors, planks, saws, hose, employing tens of thousands of people. The people in these trades, they don't want the slave trade to stop. But consumer actions, supported by politicians and big slave rebellions like the one in Haiti, they eventually win the fight against the anti-abolition movement. And so, the slave trade and slavery gets banned in British territories. Does that mean that exploitation is immediately over? Not really. In Africa, the trade continues. Huge producers like Brazil and Cuba still have slave labor. In 1850, 50% of the world's sugar is still made by slaves. And eventually, the British reopened their borders to slave-produced sugar. Former slave owners scrambled to get sources of labor. So a new project of moving people gets underway. You have waves of East Indians, Javanese, Chinese, Portuguese or Italian people sent all over the world to replace the enslaved people, sometimes without any clue where they're going, with a contract that gives the owner legal authority over the worker, and the conditions are not better. In Cuba, half of Chinese workers died before the end of their 8-year contract. And this has been the fate of workers on so many sugar plantations around the world. And even now there are many places where people on the plantations get exploited. But we're not there yet. It is really hard to imagine a world without sugar. Just go to your local supermarket and think away the aisles connected to the sweet stuff. And I mean more than the candy. Because sugar is added to basically every pre-made sauce, peanut butter or yogurt. And it's also hard to see what's actually healthy when you buy your groceries. I have these two drinks. One is soda, the other is a vitamin well reload with vitamin B and D, magnesium and zinc. So which is more sugar? Well, you're probably gonna see this coming. But they're equally as sweet. Now, this is not a fair comparison, I know, because this is about a third as much as the soda bottle, but I think it's very easy to drink liters of this and not be aware you're just drinking sugar water and marketing. It wasn't always like this. So, how did this happen? Well, it starts with Napoleon. When fighting the English, he forced the whole European continent to stop trading with them. This meant no cane sugar for anyone. So all over Europe, people are scrambling to make sugar from all sorts of things. They try apples, grapes, potatoes, and even mushrooms. In the end, it's the sugar beet that wins out. And this is huge. Sugar can now be made in cold climates. Beet sugar appears in almost all European countries. With these two options, you can now make sugar basically everywhere. There's just one problem with beet sugar. It's more expensive to make than cane sugar. So beet sugar producers, they lobby national governments. Help us, because we can't compete. They get subsidies and are protected from cane imports. In this protected position, the beet barons get an incentive to produce. So at the start of the 1900s, you have this growing pile of sugar. Sugar is still seen as a somewhat unnecessary luxury in many countries. What are the producers going to do with it? They need to teach people to eat more sugar. Sugar has to become a necessity. So when the First World War happens, they make sure that the millions of soldiers deliberately get sugar as part of their rations. And this is done again in the Second World War. But marketing to soldiers is not enough. In the US, it's now the turn of the family, stressing convenience to sell sugary products. Do you want instant orange juice? Here, we have juice from synthetic chemicals with sugar. No time to make breakfast? Here's breakfast cereals loaded with sugar. This brand literally marketed their cereals as candy. It had 70% sugar. Sugar is added to stop bread from going stale, to enhance the shelf life of all kinds of products. And this is also the time of the rise of soda. Drinks that you can keep drinking without making you full. Americans still drink almost half a liter of soda daily. And all these products focus their marketing on kids, selling food that is engineered in such a way that addiction to it is compared to a drug habit. In 1999, the WHO has to declare a global pandemic, an obesity pandemic, warning the damage our sweet diets do to our health, making us fat, giving us heart disease, inducing diabetes. Why did it take so long for sugar to be seen as harmful? This has to do something from when I was growing up. You had light products for everything. Light yogurts, light chips, light peanut butter, light everything. But what was up with these products? Well, they didn't have fat. You see, in the 50s and 60s, with rising levels of heart disease, researchers connected this problem to people eating too much fat. Research sponsored by the sugar industry, that is. There are scientists around that blame sugar, but they get completely silenced. So now the sugar industry jumped on the fat makes you fat train. And they make all these light products that, instead of fat, contain a ton of sugar. So where does this leave us? Sugar in itself is not bad. It's just the same as everything. In moderation, you can have a perfectly good diet without anything happening to you. The problem is, it's almost impossible to moderately consume sugar unless you completely cut out every pre-made food from your diet. What's crazy to me is how sugar was always an unnecessary luxury. And how we went from sugar statues to sweetened tea, pastry, lemonades, to soda, sugar tomato sauce, and Big Macs that actually contain sugar. Why? All for this one commodity. Sugar has become a necessity that we, but also these big food companies, are addicted to. And it is with sugar that we see how our global capitalist system is made. Making sure that you have one product that is getting made cheaper and cheaper, with factories not in your own country but somewhere far away, products made in another country shipped all over the world to you for a cheap price. I want to show you two maps that show our global system, and also that we don't live in a post-colonial world. These are beet and cane sugar producers. It's almost a photo negative. The beet producers are generally situated in the global north, the cane producers in the global south. This is not an open market. Remember how beet was more expensive to produce? That hasn't changed. But the European Union kept on subsidizing the powerful beet sugar industries. These industries then dumped this artificially cheap sugar in markets that had cane sugar, but couldn't compete. And it's just a few years ago that this practice was stopped after an international lawsuit. So much for a free global economy. The thing with global capitalism is how on the one hand it's lifting millions out of poverty, spurring innovation, getting people to collaborate. But these cheaper products, these cheaper prices, they always come at the cost of other unseen people, at the cost of the environment, costs you can't really see. So I was watching the end of the video and I thought, this is too much of a downer to end on.
So I want to share some things you can actually do after watching this video. Just like the people in the 1800s, you can decide what you want to buy. So you can buy some fair trade sugar. With fair trade sugar, the sugar producers, the farmers, they get a premium on the sugar they sell, and they can use that premium to invest in their communities. Obviously, the majority of the sugar that you consume is already in the product. So, well, if you want a sweet and you want some chocolates, you can go for a company that is doing a better job, like Tony Chocolonely. This Dutch company wants to make their bars slave-free, and they are using fair trade sugar. So in the end, consume a bit more mindful. I guess I also don't have all the answers, but I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.